Okay, there are some very important clues as to what has been going on here on this planet with these gods and other types of beings in the ancient Sumerian texts. Now, ancient Sumer is ancient Mesopotamia, and after being conquered by the Semites, it changed into a kingdom of Assyria and Babylon, and eventually the Middle East of today. But before we get into the Sumerian text, let's take a look at a very important passage about slavery by Diodorus Siculus from the Library of History, Volume 3, pages 199 to 201. And it states, "But to continue with the mines, the slaves who are engaged in the working of them produce for their masters revenues and sums defying belief. But they themselves wear out their bodies both day and by night in the digging under the earth, dying in large numbers because of their exceptional hardships they endure. For no respite or pause is granted them in their labors, but compelled beneath blows of the overseers to endure the severity of their plight. They throw away their lives in this wretched manner, although certain of them who can endure it by virtue of their bodily strength and their persevering souls suffer such hardships over a long period. Indeed, death in their eyes is more to be desired than life, because of the magnitude of the hardships they must bear." So this gives you an example that this problem of slavery has been going on for quite a bit of time. And what we learn from the Sumerian texts, and you're going to see in a minute, is that the gods did this work. The gods were created by a different being to do this work. And the gods didn't want to do it. It was too hard. And so they created a lesser god known as the Igigi to do this work. And the Igigi revolted. And so then they created man. And man was the slave. So let's start to take a look at the Mesopotamian and Sumerian mythology. And as I said, that whole area has changed hands. So the names of these gods and goddesses changes. But there's enough in there to get a good idea of who was who. Again, use the key of Zeus and Demeter. Zeus having a daughter with Demeter named Persephone, and then having a child with her, is pretty much the same as Enki and Ninhursag in Ereshkigal. And you'll find that Dumuzi or Tammuz is the equivalent of Dionysus Osiris as well. Ishtar would be your Aphrodite, and so on. And I discussed this at length in my Hidden Human Story series. But for the purpose of this series, let's get into what was going on. Now, there were entities that created these gods, and they came from the underground and the abyss. The abyss is under the water. And when they were done creating these gods to do the work, the hard work, they went back under the ground and under the water. And as I said, the gods got tired of it and created a lesser god named Igigi. And the Igigis revolted. And so they took one of these Igigis, named Gesh-2-E, who is the equivalent of Kingu, and they used his DNA to make man as a slave race to relieve the hard work of all of the gods. And they chose Gesh-2-E because of his intelligence and because he had caused the uprising against these Chronides. So we're gonna look at the sources from two different scholars, PhDs, Stephanie Daly out of England, I believe she's from, and Dr. Samuel Noah Kramer. Dr. Samuel Noah Kramer is no longer around. I think Stephanie is. But in her book, I'm going to read a little bit of this from this tablet known as the Atrahasis Tablet 1. And Atrahasis would be the equivalent of Utnapishtim, who would be Noah. He survived the flood. So it's going to talk about the creation of man and what happened. And here we go. Let's read a little bit of this. When the gods instead of man did the work, bore the loads, the gods' load was too great, the work too hard, the trouble too much. The great Anunnaki made the Igigi carry the workload sevenfold. Anu, their father, was king, their counselor warrior Enlil. Their chamberlain was Ninurta, their canal controller Ennugi. They took the box of lots, cast the lots. The gods made the division. Anu went up to the sky, and Enlil took the earth for his people. The bolt which bars the sea was assigned to far-sighted Enki. When Anu had gone up to the sky, and the gods of the Apsu had gone below, the Anunnaki of the sky made the Igigi bear the workload. The gods had to dig out canals, had to clear channels, the lifelines of the land. The Igigi had to dig out canals, had to clear channels, the lifelines of the land. The gods dug out the Tigris riverbed, and then dug out the Euphrates. In the deep they set up the Apsu of the land, inside it, raised its top of all the mountains. They were counting the years of loads, the great marsh. They were counting the years of loads. For 3,600 years they bore the excess. Hard work, night and day. They groaned and blamed each other, grumbled over the masses of excavated soil. Let us confront our blank the chamberlain, and get him to relieve us of our hard work. Come, let us carry the Lord, the counselor of gods, the warrior from his dwelling. Come, let us carry Enlil, the counselor of gods, the warrior from his dwelling. The blank made his voice heard, and spoke to the gods, his brothers. Come, let us carry the counselor of gods, the warrior from his dwelling. Come, let us carry Enlil, the counselor of gods, the warrior from his dwelling. Now cry battle. Let us mix fight with battle. The gods listened to his speech, set fire to their tools, put aside their spades for fire, their loads for the fire god. They flared up. When they reached the gate of warrior Enlil's dwelling, it was night, the middle watch. The house was surrounded. The god had not realized it was night, the middle watch. Ekur was surrounded. Enlil had not realized, yet Kalkal was attentive and had it closed. He held the lock and watched the gate. Kalkal roused Nuska. They listened to the noise of the Igigi. Then Nuska roused his master, made him get out of bed. My lord, your house is surrounded. A rabble is running around your door. Enlil had weapons brought to his dwelling. Enlil made his voice heard and spoke to the vizier Nusku. Nusku, bar your door. Take up your weapons and stand in front of me. Nuska barred his door, took up his weapons, and stood in front of Enlil. Nuska made his voice heard and spoke to the warrior Enlil. Oh, my lord, your face is sallow as Tamarix. Why do you fear your own sons? Oh, Enlil, your face is sallow as Tamarix. Why do you fear your own sons? Send for Anu to be brought down to you. Have Enki fetched into your presence. He sent for Anu to be brought down to him. Enki was fetched into his presence. Anu, king of the sky, was present. Enki, king of the Apsu, attended. The great Anunnaki were present. Enlil got up and the case was put. Enlil made his voice heard and spoke to the great gods. Is it against me that they have risen? Shall I do battle? What did I see with my own eyes? A rabble was running around my door? Anu made his voice heard and spoke to the warrior Enlil. Let Nuska go out and find out the word of the Igigi, who have surrounded your door. A command to... And then it goes. Enlil made his voice heard and spoke to the vizier, Nusastina. Nuska, open your door, take up your weapons, and stand before me in the assembly of the gods. Bow, then stand and tell them, your father Anu, your counselor warrior Elil, your chamberlain Ninurtan, your canal controller Anugi have sent me to say, who is in charge of this rabble? Who is in charge of the fighting? Who declared war? Who ran to the door of Elil? Nuska opened his door, took up his weapons, went before Elil. In the assembly of all the gods he bowed, then stood and told the message. He bowed, then stood and told the message. Your father Anu, your counselor warrior Elil, your chamberlain Ninurta, and your canal controller Anugi have sent me to say who is in charge of the rabble, who is in charge of the fighting, who declared war, who ran to the door of Elil. Every single one of us gods declared war. We have put a stop to the digging. The load is excessive. It is killing us. Our work is too hard. The trouble too much. So every single one of us gods has agreed to complain to Elil. Okay, I'm going to stop for a minute. So it continues on where they're, complaining and talking about the workload. And the decision is made that the Anunnaki are going to create a slave race called man, and they're going to use Bilet Ili, the womb goddess, with the help of Enki to do so. And they're going to slay a god and use his blood or DNA to do it. I'm going to read a little bit more. It just says, Bilet Ili, the womb goddess, is present. Let her create a mortal man, so that he may bear the yoke. The work of Elil. Let man bear the load of the gods. Now, Elil is the equivalent to Cronus. Anu would be the equivalent to Uranus. Enki is the equivalent to Zeus. Bilet Ili or Ninursag or Ninma, whatever name, is the equivalent of Demeter. Now, another interesting point from the Creation of Man text translated by Dr. Samuel Noah Kramer has some very, very interesting things. And what it describes is that when they were creating humans, they were creating women that couldn't give birth, didn't have reproductive organs, men that didn't have a male organ, and so on. And they were going to use them for certain purposes. But they were doing this in the process of creating humans. So it says, then she, Ninma, made into a woman who cannot give birth. Enki, upon seeing the woman who cannot give birth, decreed her fate, destined her to be stationed in the woman house. Then she, Ninma, made into one who has no male organ, who has no female organ. Enki, upon seeing him who has no male organ, who has no female organ, to stand before the king, decreed his fate. That's from Samuel Noah Kramer, Sumerian Mythology, a study of spiritual and literary achievement in the 3rd millennium BC, page 71. So they were creating androgens in the shape of humans or in the form of humans. And you can continue on with all of this Sumerian text, and I'll probably have it in my book, where they give a pickaxe to these humans. Some of them were said to be black-headed. They were creating different pairs of humans, 7 pairs, a male and female. We don't know if that's 7 different races or what. We don't know. I still haven't found that. A lot of the Sumerian text has not even been completely translated. Some of it's missing. Some of it's just completely messed up and disorganized. This was taken out of a library, I believe, in ancient Mesopotamia, most of these texts. And it's been around for over 100 years. Interestingly, too, Neberu is basically a star. And Stephanie Dalley reveals that in the Epic of Creation from Myths from Mesopotamia, page 272. It says, Neberu, he does not indeed hold the crossings of heaven and earth. Neither up nor down shall they cross over. They must wait on him. Neberu is a star which is bright in the sky. He controls the crossroads. They must look to him. So it's not a planet at all. If you continue on, going back and forth between Dr. Samuel Noah Kramer with the co-work of Diane Wolkstein and the work of Stephanie Dalley, you'll continue on to see that these gods, specifically Inanna or Ishtar, had special kinds of equipment, and some of them almost seemed computer-like. Tablets of destiny, and putting them in the boat of heaven, and other weapons to defend themselves with. And I'll get into that down the road, but they had these things called Mies. Mies gave the knowledge of how to create a city, and they finally ended up in the ancient Babylon in Inanna's hands. She got some of them from Enki. Not all of them, but some. And that would be her father. And he tried to get them back, but he couldn't. And she used it to build Babylon. So a lot here is revealed. Again, as I said, you had these beings that came up from the water, and they created these gods to do the hard load. And the gods didn't like it, and they created a lesser god known as the Igigi. And the Igigi did it, but couldn't do it either. And so they revolted, and then they used some of the DNA of the Igigi to make man with clay. Now, I'm going to assume that was man that was left over on the earth after these deluge. And, we could interpret this as the gods of the below would be your gray aliens. The gods would be your Nordics. The Igigi would probably be the smaller gray, who doesn't seem to have a lot of rank. And then comes the human, who is part of this little gray and part of what I think, they call it clay, but I think there was a human already on the planet. And they were just taking and making a slave race. And you could see that they were messing around and creating some of them that ended up androgynous without genitalia, as I just read, until they can get the formula right. And so, basically, I think this gives us another big piece of the puzzle. Now, could all this just be nonsense, and it was just white people, and they were enslaving other people on the planet? Maybe, I don't know. But quite honestly, when you start talking about people that are missing genitalia over 3,000 years ago, I think something's quite a bit more to it than just other humans enslaving other humans. And as I've read throughout the series so far, there was an Atlantis. Millions of people were killed. There was a Mu. That was destroyed. It went up and down in the water. It killed over 64 million people. And there were survivors. And you'll get into, some of the work of Blavatsky and Plato and Casey, and they'll tell you, almost all the people were wiped out. But there were survivors. So what we have now from the Sumerian description is that there were these entities, beings that were living below the water and ground, and they created the gods known as the Chronides. Those gods were supposed to do the hard work on the surface, but they hated it, so they created a lesser god that we're not given a full description of. We just know that they were lesser gods, and they revolted, and because the work was just too hard for them as well. And then they went out and combined whatever their DNA was with something out on the planet, because there's no way you're going to tell me that they use clay to make a human. I think that's just symbolism for clay of the earth, a natural human that evolved on this planet, that rose up, created this advanced civilization in Atlantis, created these beings, played around with genetics and electrical equipment and the laws of nature. They got so advanced, and you'll see in Edgar Cayce talks about 50,000 years ago was their first destruction. So over 50,000 years ago, they were doing things, and they ripped up the planet, caused the poles to shift. Then there was this, they came back and did it again and created all the volcanic eruptions, which really did them in, and there were hardly any survivors. That was 25,000 years ago. And so now that's right in the time of these Cronites. And as I've read earlier, that time period was quoted as anywhere between 10 to 23,000 years from the time of Alexander the Great, which would put it at 12,000 to 25,000 years ago as the time of these Cronites. So that's right up in there with what Cayce says about the second destruction being around 25,000 years ago. And then, you have Sumerian texts talking about how they were, these things below were creating these gods, trying to get the work done for several thousand years. It didn't work out. And even if and then they created something else, and that didn't work. So then they created man. And that's when the slavery began. The Great Deception. So we have a whole chain of command here. And they're different beings. And as I said, to have something talk about creating a human without genitalia for thousands of years ago, if we're going to say that everything was linearly coming up and there was none of this in the past, that doesn't make sense. That just doesn't make sense. So I do believe this gives us a major clue to this major deception and what this hidden history is, or the hidden story of the human race. And they didn't combine their DNA with clay. There's just no way. That to me is symbolism, clay of the earth, a human that had already been here, that was walking around, that they took and combined their DNA to make a different human, or a human that was a little more like them. And they were making mistakes along the way, but they finally got it. And then that once that human was created, they were abducting the women and making Nephilim that were more powerful, stronger, and smarter than the average human, and ruled over them. Some good, some bad. And we see that too in a lot of the ancient artwork, pictures, carvings and pictures of these giants and their flying craft as well. Okay, so that's going to end this part of the series. We're going to continue on, look at a few other things, and then we're going to make a conclusion based on everything I've said so far. Thank you.